I believe in angels. I hadn't thought of angels for a long time. Then a spiritual group that I've been part of got interested in a book on medical mediumship. I started skimming through it this summer, looking for possible ways to help a friend deal with a very serious illness. I found a whole chapter on angels and dug in. Some powerful stories. When I was at General Assembly, I saw a group of people going down an escalator, all wearing angel wings. Why at General Assembly? Last week, Peter and I and another couple from church, Michelle and her partner, were sitting by Cuca Lake as a wedding was unfolding. Everyone was dressed in white, and someone was wearing, you guessed it, angel wings. What was I to make of these different occurrences? What did it mean in my life? Then, as I sat to write this sermon, I came across a piece I had written called I Believe in Angels. I had asked in my meditation earlier what I needed to write about on the topic of world religions as one of our UU sources of inspiration. I read the piece to Peter, and we agreed that I could share my life experience with different world religions. I have been majorly influenced and have learned from Catholicism, yoga, Hinduism, Buddhism, Quakers, Sufis, Native Americans, and yes, Unitarian Universalists, and others along the way. I've chosen music and readings from these different traditions for today's service. 50 years ago, on June 21st, 1966, I was sitting on the back porch of a small convent in Freeland, Pennsylvania. We were relaxing after dinner, chatting, knowing that the next day we would all leave for summer school. That was where most nuns got their education in those days. The evening was calm and peaceful. The work for the year was done. The next day, we would close up the convent and leave to meet our friends and colleagues from all over the province, all of New York and Pennsylvania. I had already driven one group to the mother house that day because we had a little VW Rabbit, and I was the driver for the house, and we didn't all fit. The phone rang. It was for me. I went inside, picked up the phone, and heard the Mother Provincial's voice. I had never had a call from her before. What a surprise. Sis said, I called to tell you that you haven't been accepted for final vows. Your choice, she continued. A choice? A choice? My insides almost yelled. What is my choice? You can stay for the next 2 months and live in one of the convents until your vows expire. I might send you to Long Island to teach summer school, or you can choose to leave immediately. Living your vows in the outside world would mean, for poverty, living within the means of your family, chastity, no dating, and obedience, doing what your father says. My insides were in knots. They were shrieking, you can't do this to me. I've been a good nun. I've worked hard, taught the most difficult classes, done whatever you've asked. No. I said right away, I'm not leaving until I have to. I'll go wherever you send me. She also told me that I wasn't the only one being told to leave, but she didn't tell me how many others or who they were. I had a really hard time going back to that porch to tell the others what had just happened. What would happen to me? Where would she send me? Long Island seemed like a foreign country compared to this little coal town in eastern Pennsylvania. I didn't know any of the nuns on Long Island. I had spent my 8 convent years studying and teaching in small Pennsylvania towns, from Dallas, where I did my student teaching, with second semester 8th graders who had had new student teachers every semester of their grade school careers. You can imagine what that was like. To Mount Aloysius Junior College in Crescent, where I taught physics and physical science, logic and ethics. To Freeland and Homesdale, where I taught high school 1 year all the sciences and the other all the maths, with piano lessons and catechism classes. I spent Saturdays at the University of Scranton taking physical chemistry and Sundays cooking the community dinner. The next day, I waved goodbye to the others who left for summer school. A few days later, Sister Dennis, my superior, took me to Wilkes-Barre to shop for a modest dress to wear when I left. Although we saw some nuns in town, Sister wouldn't allow me to talk to any of them. Leaving the convent was always a big secret. I waited and waited for the next phone call. Where would I be sent? It seemed like weeks, but was only a few days. The provincial sent me to Hazleton, just a few miles away. Sister Colette was to be my superior there, and I thought she was pretty cool. I knew her from College Misericordia, where as a young nun, I was responsible for serving the priests in priest dining room. Sister Colette's office was across the hall, and she would often stop in to chat with the priests. I made a great fried bologna, Father O'Malley's favorite breakfast. This was long before the nitrate concerns were prevalent or anybody was counting fat grams. I picked up my things and moved to Hazleton. Sister Colette was very kind, as was Mother Richard, who was there for the summer. She had been my novice mistress for 2 years at Dallas. She told me how stunned she was at this decision. She said, "You were one of my best novices." That was very comforting. She also told me that she would help me appeal this decision to Rome if I wanted, but she cautioned that no one has ever won those appeals. Rome always sides with the community. I didn't have the energy to fight a brick wall. Then I asked the provincial for an exit interview. I wanted to know why. What was the reason for this decision? I had given 8 years of my life. At least I deserved that much. Now, it was unheard of to ask for such an interview. Mother William Joseph put me off and said she wouldn't be at the Mother House. I told her that I drove, that I would come wherever she was. We met, and her answer was that I was pushing forward and forward, and that this was not a true zeal. I tried for years to make sense of this answer. What did I do that wasn't a true zeal? I finally got the courage to call my family. I couldn't call the day that I got the news because that was my parents' 29th wedding anniversary. Mother and Dad were very loving and welcomed me back home. My mother wrote me a letter telling me that they were happy when I left for the convent and that they would be equally happy to have me home, that they thought the community was making a big mistake. My mother got me a job teaching physics and chemistry at a nearby Catholic high school where an old friend of hers was the principal. My dad found me a used Plymouth, and I paid him $100 a month until it was paid off. As my life pushed forward, I got a National Science Foundation grant to get my master's in natural science at the University of Oklahoma. I found a very progressive Catholic community there. We brought Father Phil Berrigan to speak just before he went to prison the first time. Father Bob Drinan, the first priest U.S. congressman, came to speak. As Newman Club chair, I got to drive them from and to the airport. I began to learn about social justice issues. 40 families in Oklahoma City moved into the black middle-class neighborhood when they were unsuccessful in integrating the white neighborhood. Just before I got my degree, I began dating a black grad student. He went on to become assistant to the president at Haverford College in Philadelphia. My parents weren't nearly as understanding about this relationship. My mother pled with me, think of the children. After grad school, I moved to Poughkeepsie for a job with IBM teaching programming. In Poughkeepsie, I became part of a community of Catholic families who met in each other's homes for Mass. We were all around the table, which was our altar. We were one. The music was modern and meaningful. I loved the Lord of the Dance, and I've got that joy, joy, joy down in my heart, and I want to share it with you. I went on a Cursillo weekend and later participated on a Cursillo team helping people deepen their spiritual lives. IBM asked me to move to New Jersey to work on a military program at Bell Labs. The labs were an exciting place to work. We worked with the best and the brightest and had the money needed to do good research. There were social opportunities, tennis ladders, ski trips, parties. The night I met my husband at a Bell Labs party, I went home and woke up my roommate to tell her I had found him. I had met my soulmate. We married 5 months later on New Year's Eve in my home on Indian Lake. We had a hard time finding a priest to marry us at home. My friend Rosemary's brother, Father Artie, came from New Jersey with his guitar, performed the ceremony, and sang the Peter, Paul, and Mary wedding song. Several months later, he left the priesthood to get married. My maid of honor was an ex-nun who later married a priest. I baked the bread for communion for our wedding. By then, 1972, priests and nuns were making a grand exodus from their orders and some from the Catholic Church. There were times when Peter was the only non-ex around our dinner table. Peter moved to IBM so we could take an assignment in Kwajalein in the Marshall Islands to test the Sprint missile system. We lived on one island and flew to another each day to work. Sometimes we had to work late shifts and went by helicopter to work. We got around the island, which was 3 miles long and a half a mile wide, on our bicycles. We learned to fly, to sail, to scuba dive while we were there. The Pacific Reef was teeming with beautiful fish and sharks. We took a trip with the Protestant minister to Ponape, another Micronesian island, where the people knew him well and welcomed us all with great feasts, spiritual ceremony, and many gifts. This was my first experience with indigenous religious practices. Peyote, I believe. When we came back stateside, IBM found jobs in Owego in upstate New York, still doing military work. I stayed there only a few years and decided that I could no longer support the war machine. While there, one of my employees shared a flyer on a film discussion group at her church, the UU Church of Binghamton. We attended the group, and I was very taken by the group discussion. The next Sunday, I told Peter that I was going to church. He suspiciously asked, "What church?" since I'd been searching for more and more liberal Catholic churches where he would feel comfortable. When I told him UU, he said, "No way, not me." But he came along, and we both got very involved. That discussion group and the first service at UU Binghamton was a real turning point in our lives. Our minister was Harry Thor. Although I don't remember his using world religions in his sermons, I do know that he was involved with a UU group of ministers in a spiritual group called Abraxas. I don't know much about it, Maureen might, except that the ministers got together regularly for retreats and supported each other in their spiritual practice. I went to Syracuse University and got my MSW and began my career in social work. We adopted 3 children who were in foster care. Our life changed dramatically. The children were 3, 4, and 7, with Michelle, the oldest, having severe mental and behavioral challenges. We had no family support and very little community support for this huge challenge in our lives. Several years later, our house burned down, the beginning of December. We lost everything. Our new UU family really stepped up. Our minister then was Michael Schuler, now the minister of the largest UU church in the country in Madison, Wisconsin. He changed his sermon and preached on "A house is not a home." Some of our friends offered us a house to live in temporarily, and our new UU family helped move us in with donated furniture and filled our cupboards with food. We raised our children in that church. There we both felt comfortable with a community that had a special focus on social justice and respected our individual spiritual paths. We learned that there was more than the Catholic path. This took struggle and acceptance, but it resonated for both of us. I felt like I had been brainwashed into believing that if I didn't do what the Catholic Church said, I would go to hell. This was heavy duty. We got very involved in the life of the church, international dinners at each other's homes. As youth group leaders, Peter and I visited and experienced many UU churches in Canada and the US, taking our young people to cons. We sat with the youth at our minister's home and watched and discussed the Gandhi movie when it came out. That was a wonderful beginning in learning to live nonviolence, which has been an important part of our spiritual lives. We taught the OWL program and included young people from outside the UU community in learning about healthy sexuality. Our introduction to Tai Chi was a class at church. I didn't see this as a spiritual practice at the time, but now I do. One of our friends at church introduced us to the dances of universal peace, which came from the Sufi tradition. We now attend these on New Year's Day in Rochester. I don't know. I discovered Buddhism and started a Buddhist meditation group at church. Some people at church had been attending a summer program at Virginia Tech. So we took our children and experienced a vital, active UU community of seekers. We spent one of our wedding anniversaries at Rowe Conference Center in Vermont. Now, this was New Year's Eve. This was the first time I heard the song, "'Tis a Gift to Be Simple." I'm not sure what religious tradition that was, possibly Shaker, but I really loved it. One summer, I was in charge of the teenage work crew at Ferry Beach, a UU conference center on the coast of Maine. Our children and I lived in the campground there all summer. That is where I first sang one of my favorite UU hymns, Spirit of Life. While living in the Binghamton area, we started taking yoga classes and visiting the Himalayan Institute in Honesdale, Pennsylvania. The Institute is an ashram started by Swami Rama, a spiritual teacher who grew up in the Himalayas. He brought Eastern religion to the United States. My previous experience with the building that the Himalayan Institute was in was with men from this building who, when I was a nun, I was teaching in town. At that time, they were my student teachers, and this building was a Catholic seminary. At the Himalayan Institute, we learned about the Yoga Sutras, the yoga teachings. We found Ayurvedic doctors who helped Peter with his blood pressure and worked with our children using homeopathy rather than antibiotics and other drugs. We had a meeting with the spiritual director of the Institute, Pandit Rajmanat Chiganawat. We asked him for guidance on raising our children who had had such a traumatic start in life. He counseled, love them and give them a good education. We heeded his wisdom and worked hard to find the right teachers and teachings for each of them. In 1998, my parents died and left each of us a small inheritance. We chose to use ours to take the children to India with guides from the Himalayan Institute. We went to Mahakumbh Mela, a huge Hindu celebration that occurs every 144 years. We traveled to the confluence of the Ganges and the other sacred rivers. We listened at night to the sadhus who came out of their caves to teach. We woke to a bell at 5:30 each morning and were greeted with delicious hot chai made from very rich buffalo milk. We watched whole villages of people come and immerse themselves in this sacred river. We didn't do it though. Then we meditated in the sacred grove along the Ganges while hearing the chants of many different groups. One morning, I was sitting at breakfast with Phyllis. I said to her, "Phyllis, I feel like my body and chair are vibrating." She, being a psychologist, said, "Mary Beth, just sit with it, just sit with it." Later, I told Peter about my experience. He responded that he had been sitting by the Ganges and had had a similar vibrational experience. Several days later, our children were getting ready to leave on a trip to Agra to see the Taj Mahal, and we were talking with Shelley, the tour arranger. She talked of an earthquake that had happened several days earlier, about 1,000 miles away. I asked what time had that occurred. Sure enough, it was exactly the same time that Peter and I had experienced the vibrations. As we learned more of the devastation of the earthquake, I wanted to go help, given my disaster work with the Red Cross, but I didn't exactly know how to do this in India. 2 weeks later, the night before we were to fly back to the United States, we called Peter's mother in Queens. We wanted to stay there for the night and go to a museum the next day. She asked if our son Bill was coming home with us. We said no, he left 2 weeks ago. Oh no, she said. He stayed to help the earthquake victim. We wondered where he was. We hadn't given him much money because he had a ride home from JFK. His ticket was non-refundable. We decided to call home to see what we could learn. Fortunately, Mike was home and said that Bill had stayed 5 extra days in Ahmedabad, but had arrived home. Bill had persuaded, being the great negotiator he is, had persuaded Swiss Air to honor his ticket where he was going to be, instead of from Delhi. Being a paramedic, he joined a team from Switzerland and helped pull bodies out of the rubble. He doesn't talk much about that experience. This was the difference between a 20-year-old's response to a crisis and a 60-year-old's. He just went. I had to be sure of a safe group to connect with. Peter and I went to India again several years later and saw many changes. They were building a subway under New Delhi as they prepared for the Games. We went again in 2012 to celebrate our 40th wedding anniversary. We spent the first half of the trip at Allahabad participating now in Kumbh Mela. The other one was Mahakumbh Mela. Kumbh Mela, which is celebrated every 12 years. And the second half in Khajuraho, where the Himalayan Institute had built a second facility for yoga, meditation, teaching, and practice. We visited the site of this new building the second time we'd been in India and walked the grounds, listening to Panditji's vision of what would be built. I think it was the first time there'd been a bus on that road. My experience with Buddhism began with an aide to a student in grade school. She and her husband had a sitting group in their home, which I started going to. At one point, I went with them to Zen Mountain Monastery for a weekend program. This led me to find a Soto Zen teacher, Reverend Diane Benage, in Pennsylvania. I participated in monthly weekend sessions, silent retreats where you were quiet for the whole weekend. I joined my teacher for a retreat in Vermont with the well-known Vietnamese Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh and took the Zen precepts with him. Peter and I went to Japan in 2003 with Roko Sherry Shayat, my Zen teacher in Syracuse, and Zen master Kaz Tanahashi, who was an artist, to study Zen master Hakuin. We were greeted at the airport by a Japanese doctoral student who had been at Syracuse University. She got us safely into Tokyo and onto the train to our lodging. We arrived along with a group from California several days before the whole tour group. We were staying in a small Japanese inn with a large hot springs bath inside. Although none of the Westerners spoke Japanese and the innkeepers didn't know English, they were very hospitable. After breakfast the next morning, the wife started teaching the 3 women travelers how to do paper folding. The husband later drove us to a large Nipponzan Buddhist temple. We wandered the grounds and the huge cemetery and took lots of pictures, but we couldn't ask any questions because we didn't speak the language. Later, we ventured into the village on a bus and did a little sightseeing. We started our days with the whole group on this pilgrimage with chanting and sitting meditation. We traveled to temples where Hakuin had practiced, antique stores which held his scrolls, museums. We met Zen masters who spoke with us. We visited cemeteries of our teachers' grandfather teachers and left flowers. We saw young monks going about their daily chores. We stayed in both monasteries and hotels, were hosted to many Japanese meals. We developed a taste for good noodles. Common to both Buddhism and yoga are early morning rising and deep meditation and chanting. These I experienced also in the convent, but not in the same format as these Eastern religions practiced. Today, we have a meditation group right here at church. In 2005, we moved to Cuca Lake. Our son Mike and his friends moved us into our lovely log cabin in the woods. August of that year was when Katrina hit. There was a little announcement in the newspaper about a Red Cross training to work on disasters. Several of us went to Waterloo for the 3 days of training. On Sunday morning, in the middle of the night actually, Chet Briggs and I met in Potter and went to Rochester to fly to Louisiana. I spent a month there working in a shelter of 2,500 people. I began doing prison work with the Quakers. AVP, the Alternatives to Violence program, was developed after the Attica riots in the 70s. Now it has spread throughout this country and abroad. It is a very transformative program for both the insiders, the guys in prison, and the outsiders who go in. I have worked in Groveland, Elmira, Attica, and am now on the New York State Board and am co-president of AVP New York. Both of my grandfathers spent time in prison. I learned about the Quakers, their nonviolence, their stand against war, their work for social justice, their silent meditation and listening for spirit, their working toward consensus. I am also very grateful to my UU family for supporting our local AVP landing strip with the Sunday collections. Landing Strip is a support group, this one in Rochester, for those coming out of prison and trying to build a new life, which isn't easy. We were able to help all 3 children experience college life. We found a program at Trinity College in Vermont, again a Catholic college, which included young women with severe disabilities. Michelle spent 3 years there auditing classes and making friends in a loving, supportive atmosphere. She was able to spend spring breaks with other students working in Appalachia. Here I was, back in a Catholic setting. Who knew? Bill began studying paramedicine and nursing. He is now a director in a hospital in Orlando, Florida. Mike got his bachelor's in criminal justice at the University of Scranton, a Jesuit college. Not my choice. He didn't fit in with the preppy kids from Long Island. He was questioned by one professor about whether or not I was a patriot, since I was protesting the Iraq War and regularly attending peace vigils. I was shocked, but I was reaffirmed in leaving the church. I couldn't reconcile Jesus' teachings on loving one another with the church's support of the war machine. I was glad to experience the Berrigan brothers and the Catholic worker groups who saw the gospel as a gospel of love, not war. Mike and Bill have both married. Mike and Ashley now have 2 beautiful daughters, 4-year-old Eva and 8-month-old Nora, who is crawling and a real explorer. Grandparenting has been an amazing source of joy in our lives. Our children have not followed our spiritual path. They don't go to church at all. But I don't fear hell for them. They are all good human beings doing good work for many people. 6 years ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. Again, a huge surprise. I thought I was healthy on all levels, physical, emotional, spiritual. I thought I had a very strong immune system. What could this be about? I learned that one of my risk factors was not birthing children. Since my cancer was estrogen-driven, my body hadn't had the rest from estrogen that pregnancy provides. I also had been on an early birth control pill, which had higher levels of estrogen than the later ones. Having been a psychotherapist, I believed that there must be an emotional component to what was happening. I scoured my emotional landscape and wasn't finding major stressors. I turned to a friend who had started the alternative medicine program at Clifton Springs. She referred me to an amazing therapist and naturopath. I said in an early session with the therapist that the only thing from my past that I seemed to be holding on to was being put out of the convent. I still didn't understand why it had happened. For many years, I believed they thought I was a lesbian. Later, I read a book about how the church had betrayed Catholic nuns. What resonated for me in this book was that 2 highly controversial happenings in the church were sister formation and the Second Vatican Council. I was part of sister formation, and I had asked in my last assignment to do a discussion group in the parish on the Vatican Council. I was denied permission, and the priest of the church called me the young radical from Pennsylvania. Again, I had a hard time understanding why. I didn't think I'd done anything radical. Only now I know that the changes the council brought were welcomed by the women in the church as very freeing, but were strongly resisted by the hierarchy because they challenged their power. They really opened a door to a more collaborative church. But even today, we see the bishops challenging the women religious and trying to dominate them and, quote, teach them what it truly means to be Catholic. I stand with the nuns. I support women who work with the poor, the sick, and the children. I think it's long past time for women to be ordained. I was ordained 3 years ago. Now I too can celebrate weddings and officiate at funerals. My spiritual journey led me first to more liberal Catholic communities, home masses, the Cursillo movement, yoga practice, pilgrimages, vision quests, Unitarian Universalism, Buddhism, and Native American practice. I regularly celebrate solstice and other ceremonies with a local group called Circle of individuals revisioning life on Earth. I have done 100-mile Buddhist peace walks to the School of the Americas. I've been arrested for protesting at a privately run immigration detention center in Georgia, not New York, which had been holding a man who had lived in the U.S. since he was 8 years old and who was married to a U.S. citizen and had a 3-year-old child. This child sat on the organizer's shoulders during our walk and chanted through a bullhorn, "Bring Daddy home." It was heart-wrenching. Do the words on the Statue of Liberty have meaning today? And I joined people in Watkins Glen trying to protect the beautiful waters of Seneca Lake and the neighboring Finger Lakes from the horrors of gas extraction and storage. I have met a wide interfaith group in these social justice actions. Yes, Mother William Joseph, I have pushed forward and forward, and I believe this is true zeal. I couldn't have lived a life filled with works like these within the confines of the convent walls. You did me a favor, releasing me from the bonds into the freedom of a wonder-filled spiritual path. I have learned from many wonderful teachers, and I'm very grateful to each of them. A while ago, my husband had a yoga therapy appointment, which he couldn't make. I decided to take it instead. I'd been having some hip issues. I noticed the therapist didn't seem to be doing yoga. When asked, she said, "Your problem isn't physical. It seems to be an energy block between your hip and your thigh. It feels somehow that there is joy there that wants to be released." And she saw this very large angel over me. I told her that the refrain from a song, "I Believe in Angels," had been haunting me for weeks. Her name is Angelica, and she was often with me. I wonder if she's always been with me, leading me to new paths, new challenges, guiding me where I could be most effective. Maybe I just wasn't aware of her. Then I read the words on the August page of the Native American calendar hanging above my desk. Compassion. There had never been such a winter before or since. Wind-driven snow and bone-chilling cold drove the hunter into a hole in the side of a hill. Inside the deep hole was a large brown bear in a deep sleep. She looked at the man, put her head down, and went back to sleep. The next day, after the storm abated, the hunter left the hole and traveled home. The following summer, in the moon when the leaves turned brown, the man painted bears on the lodge he shared with his wife. It was, he said, to honor the bear's compassion. May I always be as compassionate as that bear. I now know that my purpose in this life is love, to love everyone, person, animal, tree, plant, stone, water, mountain, air, deeply, compassionately, unconditionally. That love has been growing throughout my life. I can love much more freely and fully now. I believe in angels. The final reading, Love Whispers by Swami Rama. It whispers from the heights. It whispers from the depths. It whispers from the mountains and the streams. It whispers from above and from below, from the petals of flowers, from my little brooklets flow. It whispers from there and everywhere. Love is a whisper divine, but among all the whispers I have ever heard, her whisper is supreme, fulfilling all my wishes and life's greatest dream.
Extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Go in peace.
Join us for worship every Sunday at 10 a.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, a welcoming congregation. We are located at 3024 Cooley Road, 4 miles west of South Main Street, Canandaigua, just north of the intersection with Routes 5 and 20. Look for the blue signs just before the turn. Your comments about this program or questions about the church are welcome at 585-396-1370 or at our website, www.canandaiguauu.org. Producer and editor, Daniel Brigham.